They've got a maul that'll put you in the car park. They have a kicking game that's superb.
All Blacks have got to maintain a winning standard. And he's under a lot of pressure that if we go to South Africa next year and we get towelled, I don't know whether he is the coach when it comes to the Rugby World Cup in 2027.
I remember some of those games where Australia was actually doing okay, like up until the 65th minute against that great side. They're going toe-to-toe, and there's 2 or 3 points in it. And then you look at the final score, and it's 45-21.
DSPN is brought to you by Novus Glass, proud partner of the Special Olympics New Zealand. The Special Olympics New Zealand National Summer Games is in Christchurch, Otautahi, this December. Across New Zealand, Aotearoa athletes, clubs, volunteers and families are getting ready, training, supporting each other and celebrating as the flame of hope travels down the country. Text Novus to 3598 to support our athletes. That's Novus, Novus, to 3598 to support our incredible athletes at the Special Olympics in Christchurch, Otautahi, this December. Notice it, Novus it.
Welcome to the DSPN.
Team New Zealand's in trouble.
Goal! He's done it again, Ricky Herbert.
The Devlin Sports Podcast Network.
DSPN, and we're joined again by Matt Williams, former international coach, a man who now spends a hell of a lot of time just giving us his thoughts all about everything rugby. We appreciate your time as always, Matt. First up on the agenda has got to be the Rugby World Cup draw, and here in New Zealand our initial reaction is what a nut punch that is, where the top 2 seeds, the top 2 teams in the world, according to rankings at the moment, end up facing each other in a quarterfinal. That's the All Blacks in South Africa, if everything goes to plan. And the thing with international rugby as well, we know, is that there are very few upsets at the very top level. So New Zealand, South Africa in a quarterfinal. What's your reaction to that?
Well, Martin, it's firstly, thanks for asking me, but this is the exact scenario that World Rugby said that they wouldn't repeat after the last World Cup, where you had New Zealand, France, South Africa and Ireland, the top 4 teams in the world, on one side of the draw, so that they all met in quarterfinals, where that really, everyone in the world knew that should have been the semi-finals, really, for the exact reasons you pointed out. And yet you have teams 1 and 2 in the world who produced some just 2 scintillating games. I know the New Zealanders didn't think the second test in Wellington was a scintillating game, but they were. Both games were scintillating rugby, and they're destined to be in a quarter. As an Australian, I'm drawing the Kiwis as well is sort of a plus and a negative. But if you look at the big picture, it's contrived to get other people to the final. Now, I don't know that it's contrived, but it's certainly a question you've got to ask. Like, why is this structure a repeat of what we said we wouldn't do, and everyone around the world said was wrong from the last World Cup? So, look, the machinations that come out of World Rugby, Martin, I just shake my head at. We look at our scrum laws that are just not being addressed. We look at so much our bench, the players that make our bench from 16 to 23, the World Cup draws, like all of these things that everyone can just see are glaring problems. Our TMOs, what we're doing with that.
Look, I'm sure that the will and the intent is genuine, but there just seems to be, I don't know, it's cock up too hard a word, but there just seems to be so many administrative bungles with this. And again, this is something where you should be celebrating afterwards. This is the biggest showpiece in the sport, and yet I think most fans are probably feeling the same, scratching their heads, going, oh, how does this happen and how does it keep happening?
Yeah, man, it's such a difficult one to answer with any accuracy, because unless you're in the room with these people, unless you're physically there and you're listening to their reasons and their rationale, we're all just surmising. We've got these extra pool with extra teams, and we've got to question the quality of the extra teams. Is Hong Kong, China really going to produce a quality game against the big sides? All these issues and the draw, we're just not seeing the evidence of the positive actions that it requires. And, once again, we're going to see teams 1 and 2 end up at a quarter final, we think. So it's incredibly frustrating for me, and I'm sure for all the rugby people, where we're not seeing these major issues addressed. And if they are getting addressed, the outcomes that we're witnessing are not that are not really acceptable outcomes. New Zealand and South Africa meeting in a quarterfinal when you're ranked 1 and 2 is not an acceptable outcome.
One more question on this before we move on, and that is, in the last couple of World Cups, the champions have lost a game. And I know that there's even suggesting that one, two of Australia or New Zealand might like losing that first game. As silly as that does sound, when you look at the way that the draw is done, it puts you in a much better position later on in the tournament when that's the only thing that matters, because no one cares that the All Blacks beat South Africa in 2019. No one cares that Ireland won that game in 2023. The only thing that counts is whose name's on the trophy.
100%. Where you know, that's all that matters is your name on the William Webb Ellis Trophy. No one who remembers pool games. I often bring this up and talk about pool games from the past. You know, the teams that won up into those World Cups never lost games. And if it did, it put you in such a disadvantageous position. You couldn't get there. You couldn't dig your way out of that position. Whereas at this World Cup, that first game, the opening of the World Cup, which, you know, I imagine will be at Sydney at the Olympic Stadium, the loser of that could well be in a better position in the quarterfinals than the winner. And again, this surely these scenarios must have been played out before any of this went. The what if questions that you would ask. Okay, if this happens, what happens here? What happens here? And again, it just seems that it hasn't been asked. And we all make mistakes, and you know, it's easy to sit in the cheap seats here and criticise. But after the absolute raucous disapproval of the draw and how it was conducted at the last World Cup, you would think coming into the next World Cup with the promises they made that these issues would not be there, that there would be no advantage to lose the opening pool game of your World Cup. So, you know, again, instead of talking about the quality of the athletes, the quality of the players, the greatness of a World Cup in Australia with all the fantastic venues and so on, here we are talking about an administrative, well, and you've got to say, if it's not an administrative cock-up, what is it? It's certainly not a draw that other sports would be proud of, and it's certainly not one that I think we really expected.
Let's look at the whole season in total then. And one of the things that you do manage to do so successfully is wind up so many South African fans. At the moment, that team of theirs is light years ahead of everyone else. I've said that for a few weeks. I mean, they to me are 2 scores better than everyone else. In your mind, how good are they? How good can they get? And, you know, the World Cup is 22 months away. A lot can happen in that time. But right now, if the World Cup was being played now, it's almost like a lay-down misère. It's theirs, isn't it? How impressed are you by that South African side?
Well, Martin, it's very funny. I've been praising South Africa for weeks, saying what a great side they are. But if you happen to say they didn't play attractive rugby, you know, in the last couple of World Cups, but now they are. They don't listen to that second part. They only hear the first part. Martin, I think this South African side, well, I'll go back a bit. I've said for many years, that if South Africa embrace a running game, they will be very hard to stop because of the quality of the athletes that they're producing. But they weren't using these unbelievably gifted running athletes like they could in the past. You only have to look at the Lions tour there, 2019, and the way they've played. They've just based their games around scrummaging and penalties for the last 2 World Cup cycles. It's been immensely successful, but it's just been absolutely horrific to watch, horrific to watch, where you're watching the game and there's a scrum penalty and everyone in South Africa gets up in the stands and they're cheering and everyone just shakes their head and goes, my God, this is ugly, ugly rugby, it really is. But now, I think, Feinberg Magozang Zulu, the new 10, has a lot to do with this. He is such a complete athlete. He is the real triple threat. He can pass and kick, which obviously South African 10s have been very capable of doing, but it's his individual running game and his passing game that is bringing, like all great 10s, like Richie Mo'unga and you think back to, Carter, the great 10s, not only are they individual threats, but they bring other players into the game that are around them. Carlos Spencer was probably one of the greatest I've ever seen do it, where he was such an individual threat it created space for all the players around him. And I think Sasha Feinberg-Magozanzulu is that type of player. I think that, one of the greatest sides I've seen in the last 10 years or 15 years I've seen was the World Cup winning New Zealand side from 2015 when Sonny Bill was at his best, Conrad Smith, Dan Carter, were just an unbelievable team. And I think this South African team can, they're getting close right now, a couple of years out from the World Cup, to challenge that side. They are just so good. Like when that New Zealand side was exactly what you said. They were 2 to 3 tries a better team than anyone on the planet. The teams didn't play poorly against them. They just played so well. And I remember some of those games where Australia was actually doing okay, like up until the 65th minute against that great side. They're going toe-to-toe, and there's 2 or 3 points in it. And then you look at the final score, and it's 45-21. Something like that. They'd run in 3 tries, 4 tries in the last 8 or 9 minutes. This South African side has got a great scrum. As they showed against Ireland the other day, they can still scrum you into the first 3 rows of the grandstand. They've got a maul that'll put you in the car park. They have a kicking game that's superb. They're kicking off the tee is superb. What they've added to that is an absolutely fabulous running game where they're attacking you from set play. It's such a shame the ball didn't get out of the scrum in the November series as much as it did in the championship, where we just got such great attacking rugby from them. But they can do anything, and obviously their rushing defence is still exceptionally hard to create space against. So yeah, they're the real deal. They can play every single card in the hand, and they're doing all of them at the moment. Their line out, their maul, their scrum, their go forward attack, and their defence is better than anyone on the planet. So that's a frightening scenario.
It is for us because we got to go there next year. And I mean, if you asked, I think most All Black fans right now, I'm only speaking on behalf of myself, of course, but if you offered me a 2-all draw out of that 4-test series, I'd take it today. No question about it. And I'd probably consider that for the All Blacks at the moment a victory. Again, the World Cup's 22 months away. A lot can happen, Matt. Look, you've got injuries, you've got suspensions, you've got potential rule changes. You've also got a situation when you've got 45 players. It's all unicorns and rainbows at the moment. But after 18 months of being frustrated because you don't get as many games as you want, who knows what internal fractures can happen. You're talking about big men with big egos. And so, as I said, there's a lot of moving parts in this, and we don't know what happens in October in 2027. But looking ahead right now to next year, with what you see with South Africa and what you see with where the All Blacks are at, what do the All Blacks need to do to be able to come up to a level where we can honestly, seriously say to ourselves, we can go there and we can win a series there?
That's a really difficult question, Martin, because if you just said it, New Zealand number 2 in the world. Number 2 in the world. And, it's what I love about New Zealanders. You're not happy with that.
Not at all, mate.
I don't say that in any smart aleck way. I really admire it, but I also think, and that puts pressure on the players, pressure on the team, and that's in some ways is a good thing. Sometimes I think it's unrealistic, and I've seen it being unrealistic in the past, right back to when John Hart and Grizz were coaching. You go through all those times, when Graham Henry in the World Cup in France when they lost the quarterfinal. All these things can be unreasonable. This is because this New Zealand side is number 2 in the world, so they wiped Australia and completely psychologically wiped all the good things Australia had done over that year. They wiped it off the book. They took Ireland apart in Chicago. They did some really, there was some, and the games they're playing.
Yeah, but the England result is a result, Matt, that actually has set us back a little bit as well, to be fair.
I would agree with that. I would absolutely agree with that. And I think the game in Argentina, the loss in Argentina also showed some weaknesses. Look, I think there is consistency of performance. And that is, well, that's easy for me to say. That is so difficult to achieve. And I'll give you one specific area that, my history of watching New Zealand sides, I can't believe I'm saying this, but you bring it right back to its nuts and bolts, is the set play. There were crucial lineouts that were lost. There was bad throws. Timing was out. And that's not on a massive percentages. But when you get in opposition 22 against the great sides, you've got to take those opportunities. You get a scrum in the opposition 22. you've got to either win a penalty or get possession out of that scrum. You can't be given a bent arm for going too early, and the margins are fine. But if you cut it right back to its real foundation on the question you asked, if you get your set plays, if you can dominate your opposition set play or get parity, and there's another word that we could use, you get parity, then you're in the fight. Now that's been the same since Keltremain played back 60 years ago. And it doesn't change because the laws currently, unless they change, you said something there, Martin, there's rumours going around that the scrum laws are going to be tinkered with, and I don't like tinkering, but I like change, and I like methodical, well thought out change. But if New Zealand goes to South Africa and they get parity, they're right in the hunt for that. Because you still got incredibly effective players that can strike from anywhere on the field, and the defence. Well, you would say that the evidence against South Africa in the second test at Wellington, the defence was found very wanting in the last 20 minutes. I think that's an aberration. I don't see that every week against sides, but again, against England, it wasn't great. I will go into bat for all the sides, and this is also saying how good South Africa was. The fatigue in Australia in particular and the Kiwis, at the end, I thought was very, very, very observable. I thought they looked like tired campers. It had been a long, hard year. The test matches were very, very, a lot of the test matches were back-to-back, a lot of travel, and I felt they looked tired. But you got to say South Africa had done exactly the same, and they didn't. So whether that's an accurate observation or, again, we're just saying that's how good South Africa are, that they can do that, make all the changes they did against Wales, and as weak as Wales are, put on a record score. Again, it sort of tells us where South Africa are and how far even the number 2 team in the world, the Great All Blacks, have to grow. And this is the thing I like about Robbo, and I've liked about him his whole career coaching. He is a growth coach. Players get better under his guidance, and there has been some changes with you. You look through some of those All Black sides. You look at the number of caps against those guys. There's a lot of guys there, well, not a lot, but a number of guys in single figures. And that's a good thing. That's renewal. But until they get up to that 20 cap mark, that 25 cap mark, where you get really used to the pace of the game and the demands, the preparation, how you get ready for test matches, you're not really comfortable. So I think by the time they get to the end of next year, you might see a bit of growth in that New Zealand side. When you look at the South African side, they're all in that number. They're all that is one. You got a bunch of really experienced guys with huge numbers. Estebe's got 145, 147, number, right down to these numbers. But that's a much more mature team. Whereas when you get Ireland's another example, and New Zealand, Australia to a lesser degree because we don't have the quality in key positions. But when they're blooding these guys between World Cups, you do get that little dip. And I think it's a very interesting time for New Zealand. I am not, certainly not as negative about or as pessimistic about New Zealand rugby and the New Zealand international team as the New Zealanders are. Again, because you're never happy. Unless you win every game, you're never happy. And I admire that. I admire it. But I also don't think that's reality because you just can't win every game. And you only have to look at South Africa.
Yeah, what we look for is we look for patterns, obviously. We look for form, we look for consistency, and we look for improvement. And it's difficult to see when you look from the first test against France this year. We've been debating this for weeks, as you can imagine, mate, as to whether or not after losing to England, has the team improved? Has it improved dramatically in the last 2 years under Scott Robertson? And I think the honest answer to that is no. Yes, he might be developing, but the All Blacks aren't a developmental side. The All Blacks are a side that goes out there and kicks bum, wherever we go. And then that's the standard that has been achieved over a very long time, over more than a century. And that's the standard that the team always has to aspire to, or else we do become part of the pack. As far as Scott Robertson is concerned, he's under a lot of pressure. And going to South Africa next year, again, this World Cup cycle confuses people because it's like, well, what is it? Is that the only thing that we care about? If that's the case, we've got a quarterfinal looming against South Africa. And if we don't win that, what have the last 3 years been about? What have they just been about, experimenting? No. The All Blacks have got to maintain a winning standard. And he's under a lot of pressure that if we go to South Africa next year and we get towelled, I don't know whether he is the coach when it comes to the Rugby World Cup in 2027. It's not me that makes that decision, but I just wonder whether or not the powers that be are going to look at it and go, well, maybe we need to make a change. It's not a carpet ride from here to there, if you know what I mean.
Martin, I have been following yourself and a few other highly intelligent New Zealand pundits that I respect. And I've got two names written down here. I did do my prep, which is Graham Henry and Steve Hansen. And I have a document in my filing cabinet back in Australia, and it's the document of the evaluation of the 2007 World Cup when they lost to France. I want to say the quarterfinal that was in Wales. And everyone in New Zealand is ringing the bells. The Claxtons are going.
Guilty.
Get rid of Henry, get rid of Hansen. And the document is one of the greatest rugby documents I've ever read. It was done by an independent body. I just can't remember the authors, and I apologise to those guys because it is fabulous. And I often bring it up and I often share it with young coaches and administrators. And it was a real thorough just discussion of what happened at that World Cup and why it would be ridiculous to throw out or to disregard the coaches after all they'd learnt from their journey and how much better they'd be from that. So what happens? The wiser heads prevail.
Thankfully.
And the calmer heads. And what happens? Both of those coaches win the next two World Cups for New Zealand. So, and arguably the second World Cup win was one of the greatest, well, not arguably, they were one of the greatest teams of games ever produced. So, and I appreciate your point about, they're not a development side, they're an elite side, and New Zealand, there's no way a black jersey is ever a development team. And I didn't mean that. I meant players develop within the jersey. You become a better player from knowing how to wear the jersey and moving through that progress. Because the other thing that's occurred really over the last 1.5 World Cup cycles, and the last, South Africa's wins at the last World Cup were a great example of this. They had 3 one-point wins, quarter, semi and final. The top 6 teams are beating each other often. And if you looked at the great rugby championship we just experienced, apart from Australia and the last round, everyone's beating each other. Argentina, Australia beat South Africa, New Zealand beat South Africa, then we beat everyone else. Argentina beat Australia. It was fabulous. That is what I'm saying. The standards of the other countries before it was New Zealand and South Africa right out in front of everyone. Back in the 90s, Australia were there or thereabouts. So that hasn't happened for 25 years. And what's happened is the other teams, through professionalism and these good, strong club competitions they have, are bridging those gaps. And then you get your, as we term them, people have won the genetic lottery. John Eales won the genetic lottery. Carter won the lottery. You get these genetic freaks, and South Africa's got a lot of them that come through and can change games. So, Richie Mo'unga fell into that category. Carter fell into that category. These guys that are just unbelievable. It's not about a coach. It's not about the system. You've got these freakish individuals that come into the system, and the system makes them even better. So you've got to have a bit of luck with that. Now, if I give everyone in New Zealand an example, Australia's just not producing those people that wear a 9 and 10 jersey. We used to. We used to be producing the genetic freaks, Larkham, you go back, Ella, Liner. We had these people that were just phenomenal, Nick Farr-Jones, George Gregan. For whatever reason, I've got my own, and I won't bore you with why, because we're not coaching them as kids, but we're not producing these kids on the way through. And so we're not going to win, Australia this is, until we start producing some 9s and 10s that can match it, with your halves and the South African halves and even the Irish halves and the French halves. So that's the way the modern game has gone. The 9 and 10 are so crucial to the outcomes of games. So there's a lot that goes on in between that. And you talk about it, is one World Cup cycle, what's it been for? Well, Ireland have been asking that since 1987 because they've never got out of the quarters. And they're having this same discussion. And Australia, they're probably looking at that this morning going, God, we might make a quarter, but we're not going to get out of that quarter unless, even if New Zealand put out their third team, they'll still probably beat us in the first game. So, where do you end up? So it's a discussion, but I do think if we look back at history, the New Zealand wisdom of 2007 created 11 and 15. I think that's still in the DNA, even though the people have changed, of the leadership of New Zealand. The New Zealand coaching seat is the most difficult in world rugby. Even when you're winning, it's without doubt the most difficult, and they are under the most scrutiny and the most pressure because of the demands of the New Zealand rugby public. And I've been watching this my whole life, and I really admire Scott. I've met him, I've coached against him, and I've met him a number of times. Lovely bloke, and he's got a really tough gig. There's not too many other teams or sports people or teams in the world that would be ranked 2 in the world, and you're still fighting to save your job every week. So when you put it into that perspective, it is a pretty unusual position. Again, I respect the New Zealand position. I admire it, and it's what keeps you at 1 and 2 in the world. It's that internal drive. But I'm very happy I don't coach there.
Huge thank you to Novus Glass for sponsoring this episode of the DSPN and for being a proud partner of the Special Olympics New Zealand. This December, over 1,200 incredible athletes, along with hundreds of volunteers, coaches and other support staff, will be making their way to Christchurch or Tautahi for the Special Olympics New Zealand 2025 National Summer Games. Novus Glass is proud to be supporting something special, and you can help support the athletes too by texting Novus to 3598. That's Novus, Novus 3598. Thanks again, Novus Glass, for supporting us here on the DSPN. Windscreen, crack or chip, notice it, Novus it.
DSPN.